Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest currently lives in Mexico City and is the author of the romance novel These Perfectly Careless Things. Her name is Tash Doherty, and here's my interview with Tash. Tash Doherty, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you for having me.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, my name is Tash Doherty. I am a writer and an author. I recently self-published my debut novel. It's called These Perfectly Careless Things, and it is a coming-of-age and spicy teen romance story set in London in 2010. I'm from London originally, and I live in Mexico City.
Without spoiling too much of your first romance novel, which is called These Perfectly Careless Things, what is it about?
Well, it follows the story of Abby Chesterton. She's a 15-year-old girl who goes to a fancy private school in West London, and she really wants to become an artist, but her mother and her family are very against, the idea of pursuing something creative. So she actually ends up meeting another 15-year-old, a boy called Jonah Wood. And Jonah is one of those American teenagers who smokes a lot of cigarettes and reads Proust and is very intellectual. And so she's kind of enamored and inspired by him. He inspires her to pursue her art. And then obviously they have a relationship and things kind of devolve and develop from there.
You're probably the first person I've come across who has ever written a character into a book who can be described as a cigarette-smoking American intellectual. I mean, people here in the States would associate cigarette smoking with like poor rural areas like Eastern Kentucky and not places like Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Right. That's interesting that you say that. And I know that from living in America, actually, cigarette smoking is not very popular anymore. But actually, I think the character's family was from like a working class background in Long Island. So maybe that had something to do with it. But it's also the caricature, like a teenage boy or all these very famous people that we think of in history, being very intellectual and smoking cigarettes. I feel like that's part of the package, So I think more than anything, he was probably trying to live up to those ideals.
And although These Perfectly Careless Things is a work of fiction, it's been described as semi-autobiographical. What does that mean?
Well, it means that I used the inspiration from my own experiences and my own life, partly to fund or kind of influence the story a little bit. So, for example, episodes or chapters in the book did actually happen in some way, shape, or form. I was like journaling about it afterwards or reflecting on it in my own work. But then obviously the difference with fiction, and this is with story writing in general, is that you need a lot of conflict and you need the characters to be doing terrible things so that like bad things happen to them and then they transform through that. So there are certain choice points in the book that the character experiences that I experienced, but then obviously I made the bad thing happen to the character. And that actually makes the story a lot better and more interesting. So it's kind of a bit of both. And also, I did the world building. It's set in London, and a lot of the places that are in the book are some of my favorite places to go in London. So I really tried to write about all of the things that I knew and really bring the scene to life for everyone as they're reading the book.
Your book, These Perfectly Careless Things, discusses topics like periods, pregnancy, and sexual experiences from the female perspective. Why did you choose to incorporate those into your book?
That's a really great question, Aaron. And I think, number one, I remember when I was a teenager reading, Judy Blume or these other kinds of like introductory educational books, about the female body and about like having your first experiences. So that's why I wanted to write about it. I also wanted to write about it from a really honest and, honest perspective. So, the first time that you might like, see the human male genitals like for the first time. what that's really like, And I think also in general, Cindy Gallup, who's a woman that I really admire, has a quote, and she says that women defy the status quo because we are never it. So at this point, I'm like, okay, I'm a woman, I've had experiences, and I would like to write about what those experiences have been like, because even though we make up 50% of the population, we definitely historically have not made up 50% of all of the books that have been written, or the, stories and things. So I just wanted to write something that was honest and very to the point. And, what is the point of books and writing these days if we can't be honest about the most intimate things that have happened to us? So, yeah.
Yeah, I had a guest on here when this podcast was known as the Heartland Author Podcast. Her name is Karen Freeland, and she wrote a nonfiction book about those type of topics as well. I find it interesting that you work those into a work of fiction.
Well, exactly, because you don't want to, embarrass or call out the person or whoever it is. I think fiction, there's a lot more flexibility in what you can write about, but it's also a great way to kind of disguise some of those truths, and having a character embody those things, I think is very important. And there's also like a self-love scene in the book for the main character when she's like 15 years old. And like, I never read anything like that when I was growing up. And I think, as we want to have like healthy relationships with our bodies, it requires us to have this kind of stuff be portrayed honestly in literature. So that was my goal with writing that scene especially. And I hope that like other young girls can see themselves when they are reading the book, or also older women as well. I've had a lot of like older women say that it really helped them to like reflect on their time when they were coming of age from being a teenager. So it's very interesting in general how people interpret a work of fiction.
Now, your path to writing These Perfectly Careless Things was kind of unorthodox, and what was your path to writing it like?
It was very, very long, Aaron. I will tell you that. So I'm now 29 years old, and I started writing this book when I was 14. And I wrote, when you're 14 years old, you're also still learning how to type, learning how to write. So nothing that I came out with for the first like 7 years was any good. And then I went to university, I studied business, and I went into the tech world. But after a couple of years, and also with the pandemic and some other traumatic things that happened to me, I became very disillusioned with, my corporate career path, if there was even such a thing as my corporate career path, because I haven't been, promoted or anything special like that. And I just really remembered after, a couple of years of being really stuck and not knowing what to do, that I really wanted to publish this book. It had been one of my childhood dreams to become an author. And so now I'm in this very interesting situation where I was an aspiring author for like 15 years, and now I actually am an author. So I'm kind of in this like post-birth of the book depression, where I'm just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like I have like a couple other book ideas, obviously, and I'm writing articles and stuff. But it's interesting to have that huge identity shift. And that took me a really, really long time. But overall, I'm very passionate about helping people to fulfill their creative dreams and their creative goals, whatever that might be. If you want to do like sewing and stitching, if you want to get into like horse riding, or like whatever kind of, passions that you might have, I'm really interested in helping people to pursue those. And and it can take 15 years as I'm demonstrating with my own story, but it's always worth it. And it's really a meaningful and worthwhile thing to do in the end.
You self-published These Perfectly Careless Things. What self-publishing platform or press did you use to publish it, and what was the experience of self-publishing your first book like?
That's a really great question. So I chose BookBaby to publish my book in the US. First of all, I use a platform called Vellum. So this is a software tool which actually formats your story. So you just upload like a Word doc, and it'll format your book for you, which is great because then I can save money on, having to have all the layouts and stuff. So I chose BookBaby because one of my friends who also self-published her book, Diana Hawk, she's amazing, go check out her work. She recommended BookBaby book baby. But then I unfortunately ran into the issue of global distribution because unfortunately, obviously my book is set in London. And so I think actually it could resonate a lot with audiences in the UK where I'm from. So I've now kind of graduated to Ingram Spark, which is the main self-publishing or one of the largest global distributions for print on demand publishing. And it's been interesting. It's actually a really amazing thing. I wrote and published and, did my book, and I did it all from Mexico. I didn't have to even step foot in the United States in order to print my book on demand there, which is kind of amazing if you think about it. And I'm definitely a beneficiary of this remote first world. I also have my own corporate clients, so I work remotely for them as well. I've never met my different clients in person, and now I'm publishing my book and distributing it all over the world from the comfort of my living room in Mexico. So it's an amazing time and place to be an author, I think, especially with the movement around self-publishing right now.
You're currently working on your second novel. What will it be called, and do you have a time frame for its publishing and release?
Oh my gosh, that is a great question, Aaron. You're hitting me with all of the hard questions. I do not know what it will be called yet, but I will give you a sneak peek of the story. It is another teen romance story, and this time it's going to be a summer romance story. So the first half of the book is a really intensive, beautiful summer romance story. They're like the best, ideal summer romance you could possibly imagine. And then the second half of the book is the characters meeting up again in 5 years' time to see if, love really is enough, and to see if they can keep the summer vibes going, even as they're entering the real world. So I started writing it actually about 2 years ago while I was querying for agents. And unfortunately, right now, I'm kind of focusing on articles and also my client work. So I'm hoping to get back to writing it like more full time, maybe in the second half of this year. But I think I'm going to spend a lot less time writing it. I think I could definitely write it within like 6 months. And part of the reason for that is that I joined a really amazing Facebook group. It's called 20 books to 50K. And it's basically a group of authors that focus on writing 20 books, because if you have 20 books published, you can actually basically through passive income generate about $50,000 a year. So now I'm suddenly surrounded by all of these authors who are publishing 4 to 6 books a year, and they'll say things like, oh, I only published 4 books this year and I'm feeling so much more chill, than before. Whereas I took, 14 years to publish my previous one. So I'm hoping that I can get this one done in a significantly less amount of time. But I think it could come out maybe around this time next year. That would be amazing. So, yeah.
If you have a typical writing routine, what is that like for you?
I do not have a typical writing routine, and I should probably have one. Right now, I'm actually using this new app called, by James Clear, who's the writer and author of Atomic Habits. And on his app called Atoms, I'm actually trying to set a goal for myself. And my goal on every day is to write. So basically, after I write my morning pages, my goal is to write 2 sentences on a Microsoft Word doc. Now, obviously, I can write a lot more than 2 sentences, but I'm really trying to break it down into just like an amount that I can very easily achieve. And then after that, obviously, I'm immersed and I'm excited to be writing, and I can just keep going from there. So my other writing practice is that every Friday I publish my newsletter, Miseducated, which is a Substack all about unlearning and the female experience. And so I basically just usually end up throwing that together on like a Thursday night at like 1 a.m. But yeah, I've been pretty consistent with publishing that every week since August, and that's been growing pretty steadily, which has been awesome. And I just, I have other articles and things that I like to do along the side, but yeah, it's difficult because I have a personality type where I don't like to tell myself to do anything. So I have to find other ways to motivate myself. And I can usually just motivate myself with the flow of writing. So that's usually what I do. So yeah, not too much discipline happening over here.
You mentioned your Substack newsletter article. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I mean, Substack newsletter, I mean.
Yes. So my Substack is called Miseducated, and I started writing it fully and properly again about in October of 2022, I think. And basically, I just publish anything that I want to write about on that. But my articles that have done the best are usually about female pleasure and my other like sex life and experiences. So a lot of it's behind the paywall, so you can go read those if you're interested in it. But basically, it's a lot of my reflection on things like masculinity, relationships, and gender dynamics, and just anything that interests me. And I think that I have something to say about. But yeah, my most popular article last year was called How to Achieve Orgasm Equality. And that's basically to address the orgasm gap, which is something that happens in heterosexual relationships only. It doesn't occur in, gay or lesbian relationships. And it's basically the idea that the man will have an orgasm about 95% of the time that they, have that the partnership has an encounter. But female, according to the studies, it says 65% of females will orgasm on a regular basis with a male partnership. But actually, in reality, I think it's a lot lower than that. So basically, I wrote all about the different ways that we can help women to have more pleasure. And it's been amazing to also experience the reception of that. And I've had my friends' moms or my friends, my female friends, even my male friends say that they learned a lot from the article and are having labeling their female partners to have more orgasms. So yeah, that's a bit about what I write about.
I'm going to ask you a question. Have you ever had someone refer to your book as like child pornography or complain about the sexual content in it?
Not yet, Aaron. And I will say one of my friends came up with this great phrase, and it's called "haters are just fans with frowns." So I'm looking forward to the day when I have more haters. And I think in a way, a couple of the articles that I've published, I've had people, critique me or those kinds of things. And obviously the trolls, I'm kind of waiting for the trolls to come. You know what I mean? I feel like if I get to the point where people are trolling me, that means that my work has been spread widely enough. So I'm kind of apprehensive and a bit reluctant, but cautiously optimistic and looking forward to when that starts happening. But I think there's been a huge backlash recently about, portraying young queer or different types of characters or characters having sexual experiences as the teenage years and things. And my value when it comes to all of this is just being honest. My female character in my book is 15 years old, and already by age 15 in 2010, my friends and I were having sex, drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes. And maybe that's not the case for people growing up in smaller towns across the world. But in London, we were already, having fake IDs. We were already trying to get our way into nightclubs and bars. And that's the reality of the world, and I think unfortunately it's like, well, if you want to really protect the children, maybe make the world a less shitty and dangerous place for them, whether it's through like access to handguns or something in America where that actually threatens the physical safety of a child, whereas through literature, again, my goal is to just be honest about what the experiences that I had were, including like taking a pregnancy test. Like that's a real experience that a lot of young women or young couples in general have had to experience, for better or for worse. So yeah, I think it's one of those things that if we don't talk about it, we can't actually address the issues that I bring up in the book. And yeah, I just want to be as honest as possible as I can so that young readers can see themselves and have a better understanding of how the world is in reality. So yeah, maybe controversial, but that's my take.
As you mentioned before, you attended business college, specifically Penn's Wharton School, one of the most famous business colleges in the world. What were your favorite and least favorite aspects of attending Wharton?
Oh my gosh, Aaron, I'm loving these questions. My favorite aspect of attending Wharton, which I think you'll get in honestly any college that you go to, especially these kinds of rigorous ones, is the discipline and hard work. the ethic around that. So work ethic, I think, is super important. So for example, we at Wharton, we had Huntsman Hall, which is a very famous kind of building on the campus. And I think it's open like 24 hours. Like you can go and work in there whenever you want. So I just have a lot of memories of working incredibly hard, often until like, 11 p.m. or midnight or something, working on projects and meeting really, really intelligent and hardworking business people as well. So I think that was the most useful thing that I learned. Obviously, the business acumen also is very helpful now that I've self-published my book, because I'm looking at my book numbers, I'm going to be running some ads, and, it's great to have that sense of like acumen when it comes to accounting and analytics and stuff, which is, again, I also use those skill sets to have corporate clients that I, run growth and, SEO work for, basically. So Wharton has helped me a lot. I'm still able to like make money on the side while I pursue my passions because of Wharton. So I'm super grateful to it for that. And then the stuff that I probably liked the least was that we had about a third of the classes that we had to take were in like statistics, accounting, finance, marketing, those kinds of like key pillars of business. So I didn't particularly enjoy those or do well in those classes. And ultimately, I think these schools are very good for teaching you things like teaching you a specific way of thinking, but they might not be very good at helping you actually figure out what it is that you want to do. Because business at the end of the day is a set of skills. And some people can be super passionate about finance, don't get me wrong, but it's more like something that you apply to something. If you're a baker, you're selling baked goods or like bread and stuff. So you want to have something that you can sell or something that you're interested in doing. And ultimately, I think the school did not teach us that. We had all of our case examples already made for us, and there was very little soul searching involved. So I think it could be difficult for people graduating from schools like Wharton to have any kind of like creative passions or pursuits. And also then the money in these jobs that you get when you graduate is just so good that even discourages you further from wanting to actually explore what your passions are, because suddenly now the opportunity cost of like not working in finance or tech could be costing you, $200,000 or $100,000 a year, which is probably how much it's costing me right now to be an author instead of a full-time banker or tech person. So, it's a very interesting experience, but I think ultimately with everything, which I kind of like that you asked me in this question, is everything has a positive and a negative aspect to it. And I'm just trying to do more as I've graduated in my career now to focus on the positive aspects, like the community that I've gained, the business acumen, and use those skills to help propel me forwards.
As you mentioned at the start of the interview, you now live in Mexico City.
Yes.
What was the biggest culture shock you experienced after moving to Mexico City, and what do you enjoy most about living in Mexico City?
Oh my gosh, another great question. I think the biggest culture shock has probably been, I don't know. I think, well, one thing, it's very interesting. One thing that did happen to me was that I was with some female friends. We went on a weekend trip away, and I said to them, oh, we're in, Eastern time, or we're on Mountain time or something, because we are in Mexico City, we're on the same, in one of the US time zones as well. And she basically said, we're not on Eastern or Mountain time, like we're on Mexico City time, which is basically to say that once you leave the US or you leave, the Europe or, the UK where I grew up, you realize that like none of these places are the center of the world, like they're not on Eastern time here. They're just on Mexico time. Like nothing here is really relative to the US. And that's what's been really interesting, I think, for me to experience and really get that kind of breath of fresh air away from, US politics or global news. Mexico just has its own thing, its own culture. There's 20 million people or more living in Mexico City where I live. So it's a huge, huge, huge city. I think that's like almost double most of the New York metropolitan area, and which is amazing. And like whole entire neighborhoods of Mexico City have more people than my friends who are from like Estonia, or other smaller countries in Eastern Europe. So it's actually fascinating, the scale of everything that's happening here. And that's probably what I like so much about it, is that right now it's really in a huge growth phase. There's so much art, so much culture, and people coming in from all over the world. They'll be like Art Week and all these amazing things happening here, and they really are bringing in the best of the best when it comes to designers, architects, people with restaurants. Like, just amazing things are happening here all the time. So I feel very humbled to be here. And also, one of my amazing friends, Natal, hosts a great group called En La Sala. And I mentioned this because I went to her event yesterday. And there they feature a lot of up and coming and amazing Latin artists and a lot of artists from the US as well. So there's also tons of musicians who are cycling through here, artists and like architects and everyone that I've mentioned before. So it's really on the global cutting edge of culture, I would say, down here. So yeah, that's why I love Mexico City so much.
Tash, thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus. You were an amazing guest.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. That's so kind. I'm super glad and grateful to have been here.
As Tash said, haters are just fans with frowns. That might be the most memorable quote from a guest on this podcast so far, even if she was quoting someone else. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.